My husband locked me out while I was at the doctor. But he forgot one crucial detail. Good evening, dear friends. It's Eleanor again. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I always love seeing how far these stories travel across America. And if you've ever had someone mistake your kindness for weakness, stay with me until the end of this story. Because sometimes the quietest women leave the deepest scars. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 69 years old, and until last autumn, I believed I knew exactly who my husband was. I was wrong. I had lived in the same cedar-sided house outside Asheville, North Carolina, for nearly 40 years. The house sat at the edge of a narrow country road lined with maple trees that turned blazing orange every October. My father built that house in 1968 with his own hands after returning from Vietnam. Every nail, every beam, every crooked kitchen cabinet carried some part of him. When my parents passed away, they left the house to me alone. Not to me and my husband. To me. That detail would eventually save my life. I met Richard Whitmore in 1982 at a church fundraiser. Back then, he had a warm laugh and the kind of confidence that made people naturally move closer to him. He sold commercial insurance, and always seemed to know exactly what to say. Women liked him. Men trusted him. And for many years, so did I. We built a life together. Not a perfect one, but a real one. We raised a daughter named Melissa. We survived layoffs, surgeries, funerals, mortgage scares, and long silent winters when money stretched thinner than pride. We planted tomato gardens every spring. We hosted Thanksgiving every year. We held hands at my mother's funeral. I do not believe in rewriting history just because the ending became ugly. But somewhere along the line, Richard changed. Or maybe he simply stopped pretending. The first sign was small. He started taking his phone everywhere. To the bathroom. To the mailbox. Even out to the garage for 5 minutes. A man who once left his phone charging on the kitchen counter suddenly guarded it like classified military secrets. Then came the late nights. Richard had retired 2 years earlier, and retirement had made him restless. He suddenly had business dinners with old colleagues, investment meetings, networking events. At 68 years old. Please. I noticed the cologne first. Not alcohol. Not cigarettes. Cologne. There is something deeply insulting about a man putting on cologne for another woman while his wife folds his laundry. Still, I said nothing. Women my age were trained to tolerate discomfort quietly. We were raised to smooth things over. To keep families together. To ignore what hurt us if doing so maintained peace. But peace built on lies is only delayed destruction. Then one afternoon, I came home from grocery shopping and found the drawer to my home office filing cabinet slightly open. Richard had never cared about paperwork. In 40 years of marriage, that man had avoided filing cabinets the way children avoid vegetables. Yet there it was. Open. The property folder shifted out of place. The house deed slightly crooked. Something cold moved through me then. Not panic. Recognition. After that, I began paying attention. And once you begin paying attention, you see everything. Hotel charges on the joint credit card. Dinner receipts for 2 at expensive restaurants I'd never visited. Cash withdrawals. And one thing that made my stomach tighten immediately. Richard had begun asking casual questions about the house. What's the property worth now? Did your parents ever refinance? You ever think about downsizing? Questions disguised as conversation. Questions that suddenly sounded like planning. I started photographing every important document in the house and uploading copies to cloud storage my grandson had taught me to use. At the time, I felt almost silly doing it. Paranoid. Old-fashioned. I had no idea those photographs would later become my armor. Then came the Thursday that destroyed my marriage forever. I had a cardiology appointment that morning. Nothing serious. Just routine monitoring for blood pressure medication. Dr. Patel kept me longer than expected discussing dosage changes, and by the time I drove back home, Dusk had already begun settling over the mountains. That's when I saw the suitcases. 3 of them. Sitting on my front porch. My navy blue luggage set Melissa bought me for my retirement. Beside them were cardboard boxes filled with my clothes, framed photographs, books, bathroom supplies, pieces of my life dumped like unwanted donations. For a moment, I honestly thought I had driven to the wrong house. Then I noticed the locks. New. I walked to the front door anyway. My key wouldn't turn. And suddenly I understood. Every single piece of it. Richard had changed the locks while I was at the doctor. He had packed my belongings. He had decided I was finished. The front door opened slowly. And there he stood. My husband of 39 years. Behind him, partially hidden in the hallway, stood a woman I vaguely recognized from town. Blonde. Maybe mid-40s. Too much makeup. Too much confidence. Her name, I later learned, was Denise Harper. Richard folded his arms like a man rehearsing a speech in his head. "Eleanor," he said calmly, "I think it's time we move on with our lives." Move on. As though we were discussing changing restaurants. "I packed your things," he continued. "It'll be easier this way." I looked at him. At her. At my belongings sitting on the porch like garbage. And then something unexpected happened. I laughed. Not hysterically. Not emotionally. I laughed because in that exact moment, Richard Whitmore revealed how little he actually knew about the woman he married. "Good luck, sweetheart," I said quietly. He frowned. And for the first time all evening, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. Because Richard had forgotten one very important detail. The house was never his. Not legally. Not financially. Not even partially. It belonged entirely to me. And by illegally locking me out of my own property, with a witness standing inside, he had just handed me the strongest legal case imaginable. But he didn't know that yet. I let him believe he had won. That was his first mistake. My daughter Melissa opened the door before I even knocked. I had called from the car, and somehow mothers never need to explain certain things to daughters who truly love them. She looked at my face once and simply said, "Come inside." That kindness nearly broke me more than the betrayal had. Her husband David carried my suitcases upstairs without asking questions. My grandson stayed unusually quiet during dinner, sensing the tension adults try and fail to hide. That night, sitting at Melissa's kitchen table with cold tea in my hands, I told her everything. Not dramatically. Not tearfully. Methodically. When I finished, Melissa leaned back slowly and asked the only question that mattered. "Mom, does Dad know the house is only in your name? I don't think he ever bothered checking." That was the moment anger finally arrived. Not explosive anger. Precise anger. The dangerous kind. The kind that sharpens instead of burns. The next morning, I called a divorce attorney named Judith Keller in downtown Asheville. Judith specialized in property disputes and marital financial abuse. Divorced twice herself. Sharp as broken glass. I liked her immediately. Her office smelled like coffee and old books. She reviewed the photographs, the deed copies, the bank records, and the time-stamped pictures of my suitcases on the porch. Then she removed her glasses and looked directly at me. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said calmly, "your husband illegally evicted you from property he does not own." I felt my heartbeat steady. "He also transferred $12,000 from your joint savings 3 days ago," she continued. "And judging by these receipts, he's been funneling marital funds elsewhere for months." I stared at her. 12,000? Judith nodded. "He's either reckless or stupid." "Richard can be both," I said. For the first time in days, Judith smiled. We filed an emergency court petition that afternoon. Judith warned me not to contact Richard directly. "Silence terrifies guilty people," she told me. "Let him wonder." And wonder he did. By Saturday, Richard had called 9 times. Then came the texts. "Can we talk? You're overreacting. Lawyers will only make this ugly. That one nearly made me laugh again. Ugly? He locked his 69-year-old wife out of her own home after a cardiology appointment. But apparently I was the one making things ugly. On Sunday afternoon, Richard and Denise showed up at Melissa's house. Melissa wanted to call the police immediately. I told her no. I wanted to hear what desperation sounded like in Richard's voice. He stood in the driveway pretending confidence, but I could already see panic working beneath the surface. Eleanor, he began softly. We don't need courts involved. Interesting. 2 days earlier he was throwing me onto the porch. Now suddenly he wanted peace. And the house? I asked. His jaw tightened slightly. We can negotiate that. There's nothing to negotiate, I replied. The house belongs to me. That's when Denise stepped forward. And let me tell you something about women like Denise Harper. They mistake youth for power. They believe confidence can substitute for legitimacy. And worst of all, they think older women are fragile. Mrs. Whitmore, she said smoothly. Richard spent decades in that marriage. Courts recognize contribution. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I smiled. My attorney filed an emergency unlawful occupancy petition 48 hours ago, I said. The hearing is Tuesday morning. Richard went pale. Denise looked confused. That told me everything. She hadn't known. Which meant Richard had lied to her too. Now suddenly the two conspirators were discovering they had built their fantasy on sand. Then I delivered the final blow. Oh, I added calmly. And Judith has copies of Richard's emails discussing how he expected me to be too old and too scared to fight back. Richard's face changed instantly. Because yes, I had found the emails. That fool had used our shared family computer account to communicate with Denise for months. Hidden folders. Deleted trash bins. Secret passwords. Men who underestimate older women always forget one thing: we raised children before the internet existed. You think we can't find hidden emails? Please. The courtroom hearing lasted less than 20 minutes. Judge Elaine Mercer, a silver-haired woman probably close to my own age, reviewed the deed first. Then the lock change receipts. Then the photographs. Then the financial transfers. Then Richard's emails. By the time Judith finished speaking, even Richard's attorney looked exhausted. Judge Mercer folded her hands calmly. Mr. Whitmore, she said, you unlawfully removed your wife from property solely owned by her. Richard opened his mouth. The judge held up one hand. No. Silence. You will vacate the property within 72 hours. Richard's face collapsed. And any unauthorized occupants will leave immediately. Denise stared at the floor. The joint financial accounts are frozen pending divorce proceedings. The judge continued. And this court strongly advises the petitioner pursue forensic accounting regarding transferred marital funds. Then she looked directly at Richard. Frankly, sir, your behavior is appalling. I did not smile. I simply wrote down the court order number in my notebook while Richard's entire fantasy collapsed around him. 3 days later, I returned home. Alone. The locksmith had changed every lock again. When I opened the front door, the house smelled faintly unfamiliar, like strangers had briefly occupied sacred ground. Richard's belongings were gone. Mine remained. My mother's china still sat safely inside the dining cabinet. My father's pencil-height marks still lined the pantry wall. The old grandfather clock still ticked steadily in the hallway. Home. I walked room to room slowly, touching furniture, window frames, countertops. People think betrayal destroys you immediately. Sometimes it does something stranger. Sometimes it introduces you to yourself. Over the following months, the divorce proceedings exposed everything. Richard had transferred over $30,000 to Denise across 2 years. He had secretly opened a line of credit using forged signatures tied to jointly held investment accounts. When the forensic accountant uncovered that detail, even Judith looked impressed by the stupidity. There are criminals smarter than this, she muttered. The district attorney eventually opened a fraud investigation. Denise disappeared before Christmas. Apparently, true love weakens considerably when court subpoenas arrive. Richard ended up living in a rented apartment outside Knoxville with declining finances, mounting legal fees, and a girlfriend who suddenly stopped answering calls. And me? I painted the guest room sage green. I joined a women's hiking club. I planted new hydrangeas beside the mailbox. My blood pressure improved for the first time in years. Funny how removing betrayal from your home can improve your health. One spring morning, nearly a year later, I sat on my back porch watching sunlight move through the maple trees while Melissa drank coffee beside me. "You okay, Mom?" she asked softly. I looked around at my father's house, my mother's garden, my peaceful life, and I realized something extraordinary. Richard thought he was throwing me away. Instead, he returned me to myself. People believe women my age are weak because we move quietly. But quiet women survive wars nobody else notices. We survive grief, caretaking, sacrifice, humiliation, loneliness, and when necessary, we survive betrayal too. So if anyone listening tonight feels discarded, underestimated, or erased by the people they loved most, hear me carefully. Know what belongs to you. Know it legally. Know it completely. Document everything. And never mistake silence for surrender. Sometimes silence is simply a woman loading ammunition. Now tell me honestly, what would you have done standing on that porch with your suitcases at your feet?